Hi everyone, my name's Andrew and welcome to the Crossings online service. And today I want to begin with a question. What are some things that make you angry? Now, just to be clear, I'm not asking what annoys you or irritates you, but what brings you right away to a place of anger, maybe even rage. Maybe for you, it's someone who is playing on their phone at a movie. That drives me crazy. Or even worse, someone who answers their phone in a movie theater. Or how about this one? Someone who is driving under the speed limit in the fast lane, or people who never use a blinker, or people who forget to turn off their blinker, or maybe it's simply driving for you. Man, maybe just driving makes you angry. Maybe it's every time you travel, you hate that feeling of when you get to your gate after going through security, and then you see that word next to your flight and it says delayed. Or maybe the thing that makes you crazy is you go on social media and you see those people that will post things like, my real friends will respond to this at the start of every post. Oh man, that makes you so angry. Or maybe you're guilty of one of the things I just said, and now you're angry that I've called you out on something that makes other people angry. It feels like people are angrier than ever, doesn't it, in our culture today? In fact, NPR, they did a report a while back in 2019, and they found that Americans were 84% angrier than just 20 years earlier. Meaning that throughout the day, we are angrier about twice as often on average than we were just 20 years ago. Now that survey was done in 2019. That was pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, pre-2020 election. Anyone watching think our society has gotten more calm and rational since then? No? Me either. In fact, we are living in what some people call today the age of rage. People today are angrier than ever, more critical than ever. So today, what I want to do is I want to talk about what do we do in the age of rage? Because not only are we angrier, but the world around us is way more critical, way angrier than it has ever been in our lifetime. So today, what I want to do is I want to talk about how do we live in this age of rage? And here's why this is such an important topic. We are in a series called Aesthetic, where we are looking at not just the surface of our lives, but what is underneath. We're talking about what God is doing beneath in our lives to grow us and change us and shape us. Now, over the years, our church has given a lot of messages that talk about what do we do with the anger and rage inside of us. But today what I want to do is I want to talk about what do we do when we experience the anger and criticism of others in our everyday life. Because every single day, we are around people who are angry and critical, and what do we do then? How do we navigate this? So today, we're going to look at a passage from the Bible that I am willing to guarantee you have never heard a pastor speak on. You see, on the surface of this passage, it looks like a very small, insignificant story, but what it teaches are some very real principles on how to navigate and lean in when we experience criticism and anger from others in our everyday life. So if you got a Bible nearby, I want you to turn to 2 Samuel 16. And if you don't, that's okay. You can always follow along on our app. Feel free to download it, and it's a great way to take notes and follow along with our services. Now, here's how the story begins. 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 5. It says this: As King David approached Bariam, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. Now, I want to pause here and give you a little backstory. The king of Israel is a guy by the name of David. He replaced King Saul. So Israel has a new government, new rulers, and new policies that all came out of this. And as you can imagine, some people love the new king, and some people miss the old king. And on top of that, the current king, David, his son has stirred up a rebellion. So David and his closest friends, they have to flee the palace, leave their homes and families. That's King David. Now, also in our story, we meet Shimei, who was a relative of King Saul, the former king. So you can imagine, he doesn't like this new king very much at all. So when he sees that David is nearby, he decides to let David know exactly how he feels about him. So, just so we're tracking with the story, the background of our story today is, in essence, a political disagreement. Now, get ready to be shocked. because their political disagreement is about to bubble over. It's about to get nasty. And I know that is so hard to believe in our day, because in our day, we have political disagreements with such kindness and civility. But way back then, people used to get angry about politics, and people used to not only attack the politics, but also the person behind the politics. So, I know this is going to be tough for us to imagine that kind of world, but stay with me. And here's our story. Again, verse 5. It says, as King David approached Bariam, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. Continuing on, it says, he pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and the special guard were on David's right and left. As he cursed, Shimei said, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. So here's how I picture this scene. David is walking. He is exhausted. He is discouraged. He is at his lowest point. And that is exactly when the criticism and the attack comes at him. Now, this is so incredibly important because it's often when we are at our lowest that we feel people's anger and criticism the most. Let me give you an illustration of this. Last week, I took both of my kids on separate days to Disney. Now, I'm not talking like we swung by Disney for a few hours. No, these were marathon days. We showed up at the gates of Disney at 7:30. And then we still stayed until well after dark. I mean, these were days where we did like 9,000 roller coasters. These were days where I spent more money than I thought possible on children because I love my kids so much. So let's imagine that day you come up to me after those marathon Disney days and say, Andrew, you are a terrible dad. Would that have any impact on me? Of course not, because I just crushed it on those days as a dad. But imagine you said that to me after I'd had a terrible day with my kids, where I'd yelled at them for something dumb, where I'd been discouraged or tired, where I'd had to work for 5 straight nights and I missed their bedtimes. Those words, you're a terrible dad, they would have probably cut me to my core in that moment. You see, the same is true for us. If your marriage is struggling, your teenage kids are struggling, and you're trying so hard to keep everything together, and you're at a breaking point, and of course that's the day your boss calls you in to tell you your performance isn't keeping up with the requirements needed, that you're going to have some problems, of course that's going to impact you more than when you're at your best. You see, it seems like whenever we are at our lowest, that is the moment we're most likely to get attacked. We're most likely to be criticized. You see, it's in those moments where the attacks we experience, the criticism, the anger, they impact us the most. And so what we can do is we can learn from the way Shimei attacks David. You see, here's what happens. Shimei, he uses every weapon he could think of to come after David. He curses David. So he comes after David verbally. Then he comes at him physically. He's pelting them with rocks. And then finally, he uses God to attack David. He curses him. He throws literal stones at him. And he even uses God against David. You see, Shimei tells David that the Lord has repaid you. That he's saying to David, all the bad things that have happened in your past, all the mistakes you've made, God saw those and God's judgment is coming after you for those. You see, this is important because this mirrors the way that people will often attack and criticize us. You see, sometimes people will just verbally come after us. You know, you try something new and people tell you things like it'll never work or you're going to fail. And it hurts, but that's just a normal way. Or sometimes, and if you've been around religious people, you know this to be true. Sometimes religious people will try to use God as a weapon against you. You know, let's say you struggle with a chronic health condition. You might know a religious person who says things like, don't you have faith? Obviously, if you had faith, God would heal you. Or sometimes, just like what happens with David, religious people will come after you when bad things happen to you, and they'll say things like, oh, well, this is just God giving you what you deserve. You see, people attack in all sorts of different ways when they're angry. And then physically. Now, I want to pause here, and I want to be really clear on this one. Because Shimei here, he is throwing stones at David and his men. Now, David and his men are in no danger here. David is surrounded by his secret service. They have armor on. Right now, these stones, they are an annoyance. They are in no physical threat to David or his men of being hurt. And I say this because it's so important in our day and age, because sometimes people can be so angry or so critical that they can actually become physically dangerous. And I say this because if that is your situation at all, you need to know you got to get help. You got to get away. That's not what's happening to David in the story. So the advice I'm about to give is for David's specific situation and for most of us. But if you are in physical danger, you got to get away. You see, Shimei is attacking David's character. This battle is very real, but it's all beneath the surface. And I imagine for David is so painful, but it's not a physical danger. Because as David walks along the road, he is wrestling with failure and depression. And this is the moment he receives anger and criticism, and it comes at him. I mean, even before we see how David responds, we see how his friends respond. David's friends respond in verse 9. It says, Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, this is one of David's closest friends, said to the king, Why should this dead dog curse my lord, the king? Let me go over and cut off his head. Now, Abishai, his response is how most of us respond to people's anger and criticism. You see, our natural response to anger and criticism is to retaliate. This is what comes natural to us. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. And not only that, but I'm going to escalate it. You see, Abishai says to the king, this guy is throwing stones at you. He's trying to hurt you. Let me show him, David. I'll go over there right now and I'll end him. Now, I know this seems drastic, right? But this is what happens in the age of rage. You see, our natural response is someone comes after me and I got to ruin them. Someone throws a stone at me, I got to end them. And let me pause here because I just want to prepare you for these next few months in our country. As the election heats up, watch what happens in our culture. You're going to see a candidate is going to release an attack ad. And what does the other side do? They're going to unleash all they have and attack that first candidate even more. Watch as one of your friends posts something critical about one of the presidential candidates. And what happens to them? A group of people are going to swoop in and they're going to attack them with such fury and anger in the comments that it's going to shock you. It happens everywhere, not just in politics. Last year, I took my kids down to a San Diego Padres game. In case you're not a baseball fan, the Padres are rarely a good baseball team. They play in this beautiful ballpark, but their mascot is a friar. Their mascot is literally a man of the cloth. Now, they were playing my favorite team, the Chicago Cubs, who are also never good. And so everyone watching this game is watching two bad teams play bad baseball. But one section over from me, these two people, I see them start getting into it. One person says something to the other. The other person gets angrier and they retaliate. Well, this infuriates the first person, so now they're screaming at each other. And before you know it, these two adults are throwing punches at each other over what? A baseball game. How on earth does this happen in our world? Well, when we respond with anger and rage, with retaliation, I'll tell you, absolutely no one wins. And so here's what I want to do in our remaining few moments. I want to show us a better way. A better way to deal with the anger and rage out there, and a better way to deal with the anger and rage we feel in here. So today we are going to get real practical, and I have 4 simple steps that I want to encourage you to write down, because over this next season, you will experience other people's anger. You will be criticized. You will want to respond in anger. And if the only tool you have available to you is to retaliate, it is going to be a painful season for you. So let's take a moment and let's just learn from David. David's friend says, let's get that guy. He hurt you, let's hurt him back. But here's how David responds. Verse 10. But the king said, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? The very first thing David does, and I love this, is he chooses to resist. He decides, I'm not gonna retaliate. Even though I have every right to go after this guy as king, I'm not gonna act on it. And he's not gonna let his friends get him all fired up either. You see, the first thing David does is he pushes back on the narrative. Someone says something about me, I gotta get even. I love the way Proverbs 15 says it. It says, a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. There is such power in resisting the desire to strike back, to escalate. And I'll tell you that, friends, this is something I am still learning. This is a story I want to share with you now. It's a story I'm not very proud of, but about 6 years ago, we as a church launched this very aggressive year-end project. Finances for us back then were tight, but as a church, we felt led to begin a partnership with ADA to provide clean water for families in El Salvador. And on top of that, one of our local schools needed funding to provide an art teacher for their students. So I'm just being really honest here. We as a church, we were taking a big leap of faith, and I was so stressed and so nervous as we were doing it. And then no joke. The day I announced this to the church, I put my heart on the line. I talked with all of you about stepping out in faith and the need in our community. And I'll tell you, I had my own David moment in here. I put my heart out there. I was nervous. And at one of our services, right after I got off the stage, this guy appeared out of nowhere. And this guy I kind of knew. He's the type of person who is never happy and always complaining, but he waited for me. And so the moment I came down off the stage, he went into this tirade about all the things we were doing wrong as a church, all the things we should do better, and all the things that I personally should do better. Now, I'll tell you, usually in those moments, I feel like I have some level of compassion and ability to resist my natural instinct to fight back, but not on this day. So I listened to this guy for about a minute, and then I just interrupted him. And I told him about how every single time I saw him, he had so many complaints. And I told him how tiring it was to hear him complain day after day after day. And I just laid into this guy. I didn't say anything crazy. Everything honestly that I said was true. But the heart behind it was I just wanted to hurt him. My goal was to punch back, to retaliate. And I'll tell you, letting all that stuff off my chest, it felt good for about 30 seconds. And then I remembered, oh yeah, I'm a pastor. And oh yeah, my job is to care and shepherd people. And then I remembered that this guy has some really hard things that I know about in his life. And retaliating is not going to help him. It's not going to help me. Now, of course, later on, I did go back and apologize to him for the heart behind what I said, because I knew, man, striking back at someone, it never helps anyone. So this is an area I am far from perfect. But over the years, I have just gotten a few general guidelines on how to resist retaliating. So here's a few that I just personally employ. I want to encourage you to use these in your own life. Number one, wait 24 hours to respond to any angry or critical email. Our first instinct often when you get a critical email, whether it be from a boss, a customer, or maybe even a relative, your first instinct is never the wisest choice. So just never respond quickly. Always give yourself 24 hours to just sit back, reflect, and then you will write something kinder and gracious, more gracious every single time. Second thing, never get into a fight on social media. No one, and I mean no one, has ever had a productive argument on social media. It has never happened in the history of the world, I promise. Probably even a better piece of advice here is don't post things that you know are going to infuriate other people. I don't care if it's funny. I don't care if you think it's true. So when people post things that get under your skin, what you can do is simply scroll past it and just be the kind of person who just doesn't choose to stir up conflict with others. If I could go back to my conversation with this one curmudgeonly guy, I would have simply paused. I would have resisted the temptation to lash out by just reminding myself, this guy is angry about something else going on in his life. Obviously, there's something in his life that is so painful that he has to practically run up to me to vent. And you see, what I should have done is I should have just asked him, what's going on in your life that's making you so upset today? You see, what David does here is brilliant. David resists retaliation. But what happens next is equally important. Verse 11 says, David then went to Abishai and all of his officials. My son, my own flesh, my blood is trying to kill me. How much more then this Benjaminite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore me his covenant blessing instead of this curse today. You see, David uses that pause to just reflect on all the things going on in his life. And he takes this moment, he pauses, he reflects, and that is our second step. You see, we resist, and then we reflect. See, David takes a moment to think. Maybe there is a small element of truth in what this guy is yelling at me. Proverbs 15:31 says this, whoever heeds life-giving correction will be at home among the wise. You see, sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes there is truth in the criticism we hear. And after we have a little space, we can often take a moment and reflect, and we can actually see what's true about what they're saying. Let me give you a fun example of this one. If you're consistently hearing from the same things from the multiple people, it might be that it is time for you to listen. If one of your friends tells you the guy you're dating is a loser, and then the next day your mom tells you the guy you're dating is a loser, and then your brother says the same thing, and then your cousin, and then the waiter at dinner last night, they all tell you the exact same thing, it might be because you're dating a loser. It might be a sign it's time to listen. You see, this is why David, it's so encouraging and inspiring to hear his story, because he takes a moment, he reflects on if there's anything he needs to learn in this moment. You see, it takes a lot of courage to ask what might be true in the criticism I'm hearing today. First step is to resist. Then we reflect. Third, and this may be the toughest step, we release. Oh man, this one is a big one. When people, they come to us that are so angry, it's so easy for us to simply get stuck, isn't it? We just replay their words over and over and over again. And we think about how maybe they're true, or maybe we get stuck in that moment. But David, what does David do? Verse 13. So David and his men continued along the road, while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. You see, David and his men, they could have in that moment given up. They could have stopped right there. But instead, they continue to move forward. You see, some of the most inspiring people are people who have received harsh criticism, but had the courage to let it go and continue on the path they were on. J.K. Rowling, author of the mildly successful Harry Potter books, she received a rejection letter early in her career criticizing her for writing, and here's what it said: children just aren't into wizards anymore. Or Winston Churchill, his dad, this is his dad, said of him that he was unfit for a career in politics. Or how about Walt Disney? Walt Disney was fired from a job, forget this, having a lack of imagination and not having good ideas. All of these people and countless others could have gotten stuck. They could have held on to these comments. They could have believed them to be true about them, and they could have given up. But each one chose to release it, and they chose to move forward. Proverbs 19:11 says this: a person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. Now, often the question here becomes, how do we release a hurt? When we are criticized, when people are angry, how do we let go of it? And of course, there's lots of different ways, but let me give you a couple of examples. I was talking to Nicole, our teaching pastor, the other day, and here's what she said to me. She was telling me, she's like, Andrew, if let's say I'm driving and someone gets really mad at me. Let's say they pull up next to me and flip me off and swear in front of me and cut me off, all those kind of things. She said her natural response would be to get even, to drive up next to them, give them the old number one, or maybe that's not your style. Maybe you're more of a spiritual person. And so when this happens to you, maybe your response is just to pray that something happens to their car or whatever. I don't know. But here's what Nicole does. She makes up a story about the day that person must be having. She creates a story like, man, I wonder if they just got laid off from their job. Or I wonder if their boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with them. I wonder if they're dealing with massive financial debt and it's just the stress is just overwhelming to them. You see, she creates an example and all of a sudden she can release the anger she's holding on to because she sees them more as a holistic person. Another strategy I have is I will try to remember a time I got really angry. Like the example I shared with you a few moments ago. And then all of a sudden I see this other person, not as a bad person, but as a person who is having a hard day or a person wrestling with anger. See, and I would hope that no one would judge me by my worst moment, so I won't judge them by their worst moment. You see, whatever you do, you need to have a few ways that you release the anger that begins to stir up and dwell inside of us. That's the third step. And then finally, step 4, refresh. Living and being around so much anger and criticism every day will take its toll on you. It's exhausting. 2 Samuel 16:14 says this: the king and all the people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, and there he refreshed himself. David and his followers, they arrive where they want to go, but they are exhausted. And I'll tell you, that's probably an understatement, because all of us know, if you have experienced criticism or anger from other people, that, man, it is exhausting responding in the right way. It's not easy. It's not natural. So David made it a point to get away, to be refreshed. And I cannot underemphasize how important it is for each one of us to engage in things that replenish and refresh us. Now, for each one of us, this list is going to be different. For me, it involves running or sports or just being unplugged from, my everyday routine. In fact, in just over a week, I'm going to spend a couple weeks away. And part of my goal is, yes, of course, to spend more time with my family. But another big part is for me to get away and be refreshed and be connected with God. Because it's there that God speaks life-giving words to me and grows me and shapes me. In fact, with David, we get this remarkable prayer that he prays in this season. It's in Psalm 3. If you have never read Psalm 3, I'd encourage you to do it this week. But in it, David prays this. He says, "But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain." David, in this really tough season, he prays, "God, I can't control the anger of people around me. God, ultimately, it's going to have to be you who protect me. God, ultimately, it's you who loves me. God, you are the one who will answer me in the most difficult moments of life." So, how do we live in an age of rage? We don't retaliate. Instead, here's what we do. We resist, we reflect, we release, and then finally we find space to be refreshed. And in so doing, we end up reflecting the God who made us. We find ourselves in a place where every day we are living more and more like Jesus. Now, today, as we get ready to close our online service, I just want to talk to those of you who maybe are brand new to faith. And today, maybe for the first time, you realize that God is at work in your life. And maybe even in this moment, you've been dealing with anger or rage and wanting to retaliate. And maybe what you need today more than anything else is to experience the love and grace he offers. So let me pray for you. God, we come before you and we thank you that in a day where so many of us feel more anger, that there is a better way you have for us. And so, God, we come before you and we ask that you forgive us of our mistakes and our moments of anger and rage. And God, you remind us of your love and grace that comes to us so freely every day. We love you, and we pray this in your Son's name. Amen.